Hello everyone and welcome to another Packard video. Today we are going over the power antenna. So the first thing we'll talk about is the removal. So to get it out of the car, there's a mechanical connection here, and there's also this nut on the top of the antenna. The first thing I want to do though is the electrical connections. So there's a nut holding the antenna cable on, so you can unscrew it here. Unfortunately for the power, there's no connection on the engine firewall side, so you need to reach behind the dash where the antenna switch is, and there's these two bullet connectors. You can just disconnect both of these. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can drop the switch down. You can take the knob off and remove the antenna bezel, and pull the switch down. Usually there's some slack in this cable, so you can pull it under the dash and really look at what you're disconnecting if you need to. So once you have all that stuff done, this thing here, this nut, you have a detent, so you can take a wrench and loosen that. A lot of times people will put pliers on them, but unless you want to look like someone just took it off with a pair of pliers, then probably you should use the actual wrench. A lot of times these can have some corrosion for whatever reason. They can be pretty hard to take off. So in terms of the actual disassembly here, we have it on the bench. The first thing that is useful to do is there's this adjusting screw here that adjusts the amount of tension that the drive wheels put onto the nylon that moves the radiator mast up and not radiator, the radio antenna mast up and down. So what we can do, I think this is sealed with wax or something from the factory. We can just loosen this up. I put a bit of Loctite on this earlier, so mine's pretty tight. Probably should have used less Loctite, even though I didn't use that much, but you'll live and learn. So that'll come off just like that, and there's also this spring down here. Oh, I actually did get that out the first time. I got my pick here also. Or I could just turn the whole assembly upside down, but my bench is crowded right now and I don't want to knock anything off by accident. So once this is off, you'll notice that if you pull on the top of the antenna now, that this will move freely. Pretty freely anyway. Because that loosened up the drive wheels. So this needs to move. You need to be able to pull this out just a little bit. There we go. To be able to take off the antenna mast. So for removal of the antenna mast, first you want to, now I have a bunch of undercoating on this so I can already see how it realigns, but if for whatever reason you have a super clean antenna, you want to just put a little scribe mark in to remind yourself where to, what the orientation of this thing is. Though you can figure it out by, there's actually a nice drawing in the service manual in the accessory section that shows this thing installed in the car. The main thing, so this antenna plug and this coil like both face away in the same direction. That's the orientation it needs to be reinstalled with. Of course, the fun part about servicing power antennas is not breaking them while you are on the bench, not bending them or anything like that. So this thing, a lot of times there's going to be a lot of corrosion here and this will be hard to get off, so you have to like kind of tap on it and get this thing off of here. But this one's already been disassembled a couple times, so no problema there. So now we have this in two pieces, of course. You want to be careful with the, well, I'll pull this out. So what you want to do is just grab your nylon, and this will just come straight out of the bottom half. There's also this piece here that may or may not slide out with the nylon, but it just goes back in like this into the motor housing. So I'll set this aside for now. For the antenna mast, you can disassemble this if you want to. Like if you for whatever reason, only have a mast, you can take these screws out and then desolder the antenna wire from the antenna and just replace the antenna. But generally, this assembly does not need to be disassembled. The other thing you can take a look at is sometimes antennas will break because this piece on the bottom here will leave, either the nylon will break or kind of I have another one here to show you. This thing is crimped in place, and so you can see this interior one, one moving back and forth. Hopefully this is showing up on camera, but that's split there because it was crimped originally, but then the nylon got yanked out of it. So that might be able to be repaired if you're a bit ingenious, but I'm not going to try and do that in this video. The other thing to do with this antenna shaft when it's out is just to lubricate it. I like to use this grease here. It just needs just a little coat of grease. This stuff is very water resistant, so unlike something like just normal oil, this stuff will last a little bit longer even if you get caught in the rain or anything like that. Moving back to the motor assembly. So you can see my my desk is getting very dirty with all the undercoating flaking off, but not much I can do about that. So to disassemble this, the first thing I like to do is take off this coil under here. It's not strictly necessary, but it can just be a little annoying. But this just comes off with only 2 extra screws, so it's not too bad. Pop this right off here. There is one more screw, it's this one right up here, and then you can take it off. So we'll take this coil off here, and then we can open up the cover above the motor for inspection. This is one of those assemblies where when they were new, you didn't really have to worry about them at all. But after 69 years or so, they do need a little bit of attention sometimes. A little bit of lubrication. These actually have 5 different lubrication points inside the motor, believe it or not. So what we do now is there's just 2 more screws here. Nothing too crazy. As long as this thing's already out, the spring, that's the only thing that can get in the way of taking this apart. These screws here, it's worth noting, are all different lengths. Even the 2 shorter ones are slightly different. So it goes long, medium, short. The reason why is you go under here. For whatever reason, this has a boss that goes up much higher than this one. Don't really know why, but that's how they did it. As you can see, there's a nice amount of corrosion down there, but it's not really going to hurt a whole lot, so I'm not going to try and do much about that. As a side note, if you're bench testing the motor, don't disassemble it any more than this. It's not going to want to spin. So the lubrication points here, I just lubed these up, so these still have some oil on them. But you have these 3 felts right here. Just drip some 3-in-1 oil right in there and get that thing lubed up nice and good. It will appreciate it. I actually did a test where I tested the amount of current the motor required and then lubed up all the points on the motor and then tried it again, and it was 10% less power required by the motor, 10% less current. So it's obviously reduces mechanical wear. It also reduces the demand on the motor, so the motor should last longer and all those good things. So there's these 3 points, and then I like to put some grease on these wheels here. Same thing, I just use this stuff. It's pretty safe for like almost anything. And then of course you have this bronze bushing in here, which can use a bit of oil. There is also under the motor here, you can just take this screw out of here, and there's another bushing to put some oil in there, put the screw back in. For actually inspecting the motor, well, actually there's another thing to talk about. Make sure this thing here is loose. So there's this screw and this nut. A lot of times, especially this nut for some reason, will just be a little too tight, and you'll open the thing up and it'll be like this. Just a little too stiff, so you're not gonna have a consistent preload on that, on the nylon there. So you wanna make sure this is loose enough where this thing can slide back and forth easily. So For the motor inspection here, we have just 3 more screws to take apart. You want to make sure and pull these 2 halves apart in this orientation because there is a tiny ball bearing that can fall out and you might not find it again. So we will just go ahead and take these apart. The ball bearing is directly above that motor, the motor shaft. So the ball bearing is hidden right up in here. A lot of times it'll stick to the grease on the motor shaft too. So we'll just pop this apart, keep an eye out. So I believe our ball bearing stayed, yeah, it stayed down there. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's right in there. So set that aside. For the motor here, you do have to desolder stuff to actually disassemble the motor, but there's also really no reason to disassemble it. This is stuck on me. Okay, there we go. You can inspect your brushes here. Generally, the rule of thumb is to replace brushes when they're half worn out, which is what I mean is when the current size is half of the original size. For these, you can see they started out around here. Now they're only down to here. So I'd say these are worn about 1/4 of their length, which means they're realistically about half worn out. So no need to replace these. This capacitor here, if you want to desolder one side and use a capacitance tester to find that it's still in tolerance, wouldn't be a bad idea, but it's probably fine as long as this is a plastic capacitor. It's not leaking or whatever, it's probably fine. This will reduce wear on the motor brushes, and it'll also reduce electrical noise caused by the motor. So ironically, like if you have the radio on and try extending the power antenna, you might hear noise coming through the radio from the power antenna motor, especially if this is not, if this is no longer has any capacitance or whatnot. Yeah, like I said, you have to actually like disassemble the motor and you have to desolder things. I'm not going to do any of that here. There's really no reason to. But yeah, there you have it with the motor assembly. And then while this, wait, that's not the right piece. While this thing's apart, you can grease up that bronze bushing in there. How this motor works actually, it's worth mentioning. So each of these 2 wires coming in goes to a separate field coil. So how the motors work is you'll have, or I should say it's a separate pair of field coils. I believe they should be pairs. You have a pair of field coils beside the armature. So maybe there's one here, there's one here. So when you apply electricity through these field coils, they basically just turn into a big magnet and create a magnetic field in this motor. When you apply electricity to the armature, which is this middle part, that also creates a magnetic field. And just like if you have 2 magnets that are next to each other, they're going to try to turn towards each other or away from each other or whatever, the force is going to come from the magnetic orientation. So the same thing is true here when you have the field coils making a magnetic field and then the armature making a magnetic field. The armature is going to try and spin from its design. It's going to try and spin to get towards or away from the field coils, whichever way they designed it. So, and then by the fact that the windings in the armature change based on what position the armature is in, and that's what the brushes do. You can see this goes to these different sections. Then where the forces the magnetic orientation keeps changing to the way that the motor wants to spin, and that's how the motor spins. But the specific orientation of the magnetic field reverses when you change the polarity of the motor. So for a motor like this, where you have the field coil the magnetism being generated by field coils and in the armature, both of those will reverse at the same time. So reversing the polarity of the motor doesn't actually change which way the motor spins, because both of the orientations of those respective magnetic fields change whenever each reverse the polarity. So this one has 2 sets of field coils, one of them with reverse polarity. So when you have power going through one wire, it goes through one set of field coils, and then it comes back up here and flows through the armature, which then it goes to ground. When you use the other wire, it goes through the other set of field coils, then back up through the armature. So you connect one lead to ground, and then one lead, the other lead to one of these at a time to make it go up or down. Kind of the interesting thing though is that it doesn't actually matter what the polarity is. Like if you connect a lead to ground and up, it doesn't matter whether you connect plus to ground or minus to ground. It'll still go up. Same thing with down. So the labeling on these is irrespective of the actual polarity of the car. You just have to have them hooked up right. So we'll just go ahead and reassemble the motor here. Whoops, I almost dropped the... Do as I say, not as I do. So I dropped the ball bearing here. No biggie, because I didn't lose it. All I have to do is just drop it right back in here. Now it's back in its home. And then I'll try again, keeping this in the correct orientation to reassemble. And now you see why I would say that is the correct orientation. Learning through making mistakes, everybody's favorite. And if this thing doesn't want to go in properly, it's usually because the gears are just in kind of a random orientation. You just have to spin one of them a little bit and that'll get it back right again. So now we got this put back together. We can reattach our screws. I believe the grounding wire screw goes right next to the power cable. If you don't have the ability to bench test it, I would make sure that you clean the bottom of the screw and the top of the housing and this connector off just a little bit to make sure there's no corrosion or undercoating getting in the way of having a good connection there. But I can bench test it, so if it doesn't work, then I don't have to find that out only after reinstalling it. Likewise, we can just pop these other screws back in here. The reassembly on this is not anything too unexpected. The only thing is just setting the tension properly on the nylon. You can try and set it the same way it was at the factory, but in my experience, when I was trying to do that, it seemed to be a little bit tight, the way they had it set to begin with. Maybe I set it back up wrong, but it's not too hard to just figure out a reasonable amount of tension for it. I'll just show that in a second once I have it put back together here. There we go. These things are pretty quick to repair. I mean, I know this video is not going to be super short, but I'm basically doing, well, I am literally doing everything live. Uncut, no speed ups or anything like that. And these things really do get put back together pretty quick. Even if you need to lube everything up, it really doesn't take that long. Obviously, it takes a lot less time when you're not simultaneously explaining everything too. So really is no problem at all. Like I said, one of these things that, you know, it might be working fine, might be working well enough, but really ain't gonna hurt to go lube it up and have confidence that it's in a good operating condition, and it'll make it last that much longer. So again here, this is out of these three, the shortest screw here, the second shortest, and the longest. And the difference in height between the shortest and second shortest screws is only a couple of threads. It's only like 1/4 inch or something. So just keep an eye out. All right, and then this goes back in here. Easiest way is to just expand this whole thing and then have it where your orientation, so the natural bend matches that, and then just stick it in like that. But I have to do it off camera because I'm all the way out here, about 3 feet to your left. Just feel how it sticks between the wheels. Nothing too difficult. Stick this back in here, and then we can reattach this. Of course, when you push this back on, then it'll just raise the antenna mast slightly. So match up your scribe marks. For me, I'm matching up my, whatever this is, the undercoating drip line or something. But better to have some undercoating than to not, hopefully. It seemed to preserve my car fairly decently, so really not too bad. This thing pretty much never wants to, especially if you have the undercoating, it never wants to go on flush the first time, so these screws can be a little annoying to get back in, but not too big of a problem. There we go. Let's see here, come on. These are the annoying ones. It's always the short screws that are the annoying ones to try and get back in. Especially flathead ones, they don't stick on the end of the driver very well. But we all knew that. Not news to you, I'm sure. Comment if that was news to you, but I think we can all agree on that. Of course, the main difficulty in bench repairing a power antenna is not just breaking the thing by accident or bending the shaft because you hit it on something. Just something to remind yourself of. All right, so it's all physically reassembled, aside from our tensioning piece. So what I find is generally a pretty good initial tension is drop the spring in. And I already put some Loctite on this, so it's going to be a little goofy trying to find when it actually starts to be springy. But there we go. So right around here, I think was when it started to be springy. And you can just turn it about one more revolution. So on this one, it's like this orientation. If I screw it anymore, it's like flush or below flush. So this orientation just above flush on mine is a good starting position. So we can test it out on the bench, or you can just test it out in the car, because this should be accessible under the hood. If you need to tighten it down sometime, it's not too hard. But for testing on the bench here, I can just hook this right up so we can extend the antenna mast. Yeah, make sure these two don't touch. Point it in a safe direction, just like a loaded firearm. And what's the problem we have here? We have a short somewhere, or what? Maybe our antenna mast is just a little bit stuck. This might be, I might have turned this down too far. The other thing you can do is just have this be loose all the way, and then try to make it, then apply power to it, I mean. Yeah, so our motor's working perfectly fine, so let's just try this a little looser. So maybe around there. There we go, perfect. So it went up all the way. Of course, it's off camera, but that went up all the way. But also when it went up all the way, the wheels, you couldn't really even hear it change in the motor tone. So like if you went up all the way, and as soon as it stops and the motor's like whining, then the motor has a bit too much grip on it. So we can just switch the orientation now. Keep my shaft from hitting anything when it's fully extended. Just switch this up, and now try the retraction to make sure it also retracts nicely. Perfect. So, as we can see, this is our orientation. So I misremembered. I thought it was just above flush, but it was actually an additional half turn out. But as long as you don't put Loctite in this, or the threads aren't too messed up or something, you'll be able to tell when it starts to hit the spring. Probably one turn after it starts to hit the spring, for me, seems to be a pretty good amount of tension. And of course, after you install it in the car, if you have to turn it up by a quarter turn or something, then so be it. Not too hard. So with that all being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it informative. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. I do read all my comments, so I'll see if I can get back to you about anything. If you liked the video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.